How much does a Warhammer 40k army actually cost? It's the first question everyone asks before getting into this hobby, and the honest answer is, it depends entirely on whether you have a plan or not. I know this from personal experience. Across 4 armies over my time in this hobby, I spent roughly $5,000 with Tyranids, Votann, Necrons, and Custodes. Some of that was money well spent. A significant chunk wasn't. And the difference between the two almost has nothing to do with the price of the models and everything to do with whether I went in with a clear plan or not. So today, I'm going to give you an honest breakdown that nobody gave me when I was starting, for the newer people that are just joining the hobby here in 11th. Some real numbers, some real benchmarks, and the traps that cost me way more than it should have. Let's start with the most important number for anyone brand new to the hobby. What does it actually cost to get on the table and play your first games? The simple answer is a combat patrol box. Every faction has one, and they're designed to specifically give you a small but complete force that you can play the combat patrol format games, straight out of the box. You're looking at roughly $150 to $200 depending on where you are and what faction you pick. So that's your real entry point to actually start playing Warhammer 40k. So that's the real entry point to actually start playing 40k. Now, is a combat patrol a full competitive army? No. It's roughly around 400 to 500 points, which is a quarter of a standard game. But it gives you enough models to learn the rules, learn your faction, and figure out whether you actually enjoy the game before committing to a much bigger investment. And that matters a lot. Because the biggest mistake I made early on was skipping that learning phase and going straight into buying as many models as possible. If you want an alternative, even lower entry point, Kill Team is another option. At a similar price, it's a skirmish game using 40k models. The rules are simpler and the model count is much lower. A great way to dip your toe in without drowning in plastic on day one. So, what does a proper, full-sized competitive army actually cost? The kind you take to a league or a casual tournament? If you go in with a clear plan, you know the army you want, you understand the playstyle, you've researched what units you actually need to build a list before spending a single dollar, you can put together a solid 2,000 point list for around $1,000. That includes your combat patrol as a foundation, a few targeted box purchases to fill the gaps, and maybe 1 or 2 centerpiece models. That's kind of the number with a plan. Without a plan? Well, I'll tell you what I spent on Tyranids, my very first army when I started. I started with the Ultimate Starter set, which was around $300 at the time. Then I bought a pre-owned Leviathan half. Then I had to follow it up with a Norn Emissary because that model's incredible and one of my favorites still. After that, I kind of got some Exocrines, some Maliceptors, some Carnifexes, a Broodlord, some Gene Stealers. Managed to find some pre-owned Hormagaunts, then a Hive Tyrant, and a Swarm Lord, some Zoanthropes, a Tyrannifex, a Death Leaper, so on and so on. As you can tell, I kind of went in with random purchases, just based on things that I thought looked cool, or I assumed would be good just because, higher price, or everybody kind of referred to them and they were in staple armies for certain competitive lists, but I didn't know why. So I just kept buying and hoping for the best. So the rough estimate for the things that I had purchased at mostly retail prices is around $2,000 on an army I ended up moving on from because I hadn't properly researched whether they play the way I imagined. And that's the difference between having a plan and not having one. $1,000 versus $2,000 for the same result on the table. Since I'm being fully transparent in this video, let me walk you through what I actually spent across most of the armies I've collected. Tyranids were my first army, and like I said, I spent around $2,000, and I bought without a plan, accumulated more than I needed, and ultimately moved on when the playstyle didn't match what I expected. Leagues of Votann, they're my second army, and I spent around $1,000. I got a better deal here because of starting chunk of it. I got second hand, but I ended up with an army that I struggled to paint and didn't enjoy as much as I hoped. Now, I was very lucky. I managed to find this army all in boxes, brand new, on the sprue. It was basically straight from the store. The guy who purchased them decided he had changed his mind or life changed and he couldn't afford this decision anymore. So I was very fortunate. And in a little bit of a mix-up, I thought I was purchasing 2 hecatons, and I got 4 instead for the same price. So I have no complaints, really appreciate how that deal worked out, but that's kind of a rare off chance. But that just shows the value of looking at the secondhand market before you just go and purchase from GW. Necrons are my third army and the one I've stuck with the most. Now I've spent around $1,500, and here's the thing. That's more than the Votann spend, but this time I had a plan. I knew the playstyle. I had a paint scheme that I could execute, and I built towards a specific list rather than just buying whatever looked good or I thought was cool. Every dollar of that is working for me on the table. I've since expanded my list, and that's why the number's grown a little bit more, because the new Nightbringer came out, the Necrosaur came out, a bunch of newer models came out that adapted my playstyle and allowed me to enhance what I can do with the Necrons. But getting into it wasn't as expensive as my mistakes that I had made with the Tyranids. So the total across the 4 armies is just shy of $5,000. I'm not telling you that to brag or scare you. I'm telling you that because that number has a lesson buried in it. The $2,000 I spent on Tyranids and the $1,000 to $1,300 on Votann without a clear plan cost me far more than the enjoyment I got out of it. Whereas I spent around $1,500 on Necrons with the proper roadmap, and the price isn't the problem, the planning was. And I've played plenty of games with Necrons and I've enjoyed every one of them. That's a very painful and expensive problem that I learned the hard way. And I hope I could help other people avoid that entirely. So that's the whole purpose of this video. Here's the part of the budget that nobody puts into the headline number. The stuff that isn't models, but you absolutely need before you can actually sit down and play. Paints. You need them to paint your army. New players often make the mistake of buying every color they think they need before they actually figured out their paint scheme. Try not to do that. Try and figure out your paint scheme first. Buy only the scheme requires and add individual colors as you actually need them. A solid starter paint collection for a specific scheme is maybe 10 to 15 colors. You'll need some brushes and tools, a couple of decent brushes, some plastic glue, a hobby knife, maybe a cutting mat. Nothing fancy required at the start. You can even substitute that cutting mat for some cardboard. You'll need primer, so the paint will have something to stick to nicer. So that's a bit of essential. So that's an essential one. But don't think you have to go with the GW one. There are plenty out there for a fraction of the price. Just make sure it's thin enough where it won't take away the detail. Every model needs to be primed before you paint it. Otherwise that paint won't stick properly and it'll kind of droop and fall apart. The next thing is storage. This is the one that catches people off guard. You need somewhere to keep your painted models that isn't just a shelf where they'll fall over and break, but more importantly, you need to be able to transport them to your local game store. So a storage solution that just keeps them safe at home isn't enough if you actually want to play the games. You'll need something a little bit more portable. Good news is that all this together, a solid starter paint setup, some basic tools, primer, and a decent transport solution can easily come in to around $50 to $75 if you're sensible about it. That's not nothing, but it's also not the terrifying hidden cost some people make it out to be. If those numbers are making you nervous, here's a legit way to bring the cost down significantly. The secondhand market. I've said it before on this channel, I said it earlier in this video, and I'll keep saying it. Facebook Marketplace, eBay, Reddit's miniature swap communities, and your local game store potentially sells secondhand models. And all those are full of people selling their armies, whether they're partial, individual kits, and it's always at a significant discount. Like I said earlier, I got 90% of my Votann army secondhand at a good price, and they were all still in the box on the sprues. So always try and check there first before buying new. There are also discount retailers that Games Workshop sells directly to. Plenty of them are online. They sell Warhammer products for 15 to 20% off. That saves you a significant amount of money real quick over the course of building that army. The big launch boxes that GW releases at the start of each edition are almost always the best value they offer over the models. If you can split one with a friend who wants the other faction, you can get a significant chunk of the army for a fraction of what those models would cost separately. And then there's 3D printing. If you have access to a 3D printer or know someone who does, proxy models for some of the more expensive units, and that can bring down your costs considerably, especially for units you want multiple of. Let me give you a bit of a summary, the honest budget breakdown for getting into 40k. Just to try it out, Combat Patrol or Kill Team is around $150 to $200. A proper 2,000 point army with a plan can come in around $1,000, give or take a little bit. And a proper 2,000 point army without a plan, at least for me, came in around $2,000. Paints, tools, primers, and transport, if you do it fiscally, can easily come in from anywhere from $50 to upwards to $100, depending on how fancy you want to get. So the total realistic starting budget with a plan is probably around $1,000 to $1,100. Those are as clear and honest numbers as I can come up with. But the single biggest variable in all of them is whether you go in with a clear plan for the army you want, what playstyle suits you, and what a complete list actually looks like before you spend $1. I spent over $5,000 across 4 armies to learn that lesson, and I hope you don't have to. Warhammer 40k is an expensive hobby. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but it's also one of the most rewarding hobbies. And that cost is absolutely manageable if you go in with the right approach. Start with a Combat Patrol, learn the game, figure out your playstyle before you spend big, check the secondhand market, and build toward a specific list rather than just buying whatever looks good. If you want more on how to avoid expensive mistakes I've made, my 10 mistakes every new player makes video is a place to start. I'll put a link in the description. And if you already know which army you want, I've been making step-by-step army build guides for several factions on the channel as well. Drop a comment and tell me what you've spent on this hobby. There's no judgment. I showed you mine. If you don't mind, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Thank you.